Okay. Every one of us is on a search for something, whether you realize it or not. The way you live your life and the things you do and the way you prioritize your time, you are searching for something. We may not notice that we're doing it. We may not actually notice that the way we live and the things that we do are out of a desire for something, for satisfaction, for fulfillment. Humans are very self-focused and self-driven people. We want to be comfortable. We want to feel the feeling of satisfaction. We want to get all that we can out of life. But sometimes we don't know how to do that. See, sometimes we might focus on things like a promotion, for example, if you work. And you get everything that you've been striving for. Maybe it's your education. Maybe you're working towards a goal. And you're working hard and you're putting in the effort and you have this kind of finish line that you see, and this is what I'm trying to attain. And then when you get there, you have a momentary feeling of satisfaction. And then as time passes on, that satisfaction, it weakens, it disappears. It's the fulfillment that you might have expected in that goal is not there anymore. Maybe you meet somebody and you start to invest into this relationship. And you start to rely on this person in a way that they become an answer to a void that you have in your life. And then time passes and the relationship becomes ordinary. Or you see the flaws in the person and they see the flaws in you. And suddenly, the hope that you had in that relationship, it just doesn't give you the fulfillment that you maybe expected going into it. You're saving money for the ultimate trip, maybe. Some years ago, we had this want to just kind of do a big trip of the US, and we saved all this money and we went to all these different places in the States. It was great. We had created lots of memories as a family, but that time has passed and gone, and it gave us a momentary sense of achievement, but it means nothing now. And life is quite often like this. We are chasing and chasing and chasing, and we are searching and searching and searching, and we are looking and looking and looking, and sometimes we don't even know what it is we're looking for. So we just try to pull all of these things into our life in that search, in the want to be satisfied and filled. And how often, I don't know if you've experienced it, but lots of things that I've chased in my life, I've gotten to a point where I've sat at some point, post-achieving it, and gone, is this it? Is this all that there is? And it's a question that doesn't suggest that something's wrong with us. It's just a sign that we're human. We have desires. We have desires because God has wired us like that. He's wired us with desire. But sometimes we misalign where that desire should go, and therefore we walk away not feeling satisfied. I hope that as I've kind of set the scene, that even now God may be stirring on your heart that there are things in your life that you are chasing and that you have here that aren't satisfying you, and there's a reason for that. We go looking everywhere. Some of us search for fulfillment in substances, right? And not a lot of us. So it's easy to look at that and look at somebody who has a drug or an alcohol problem, for example, and be able to point out and go, well, what they have, what they're filling their life with there is negative. It's destructive, right? It's easy to do that sometimes. But we do the same You may not have the drug and alcohol problem, but there is something that you have that you are trying to fill a void in your life. There is something. For some of us, it might be control. This is actually a big one for me. I work in an environment where there is not much control. So I work in a space where I'm dealing with trauma, people that have experienced all sorts of levels of trauma, and that comes out in behavior, and there is no control, so to speak. So part of my job is creating control. And it's funny that as I've experienced that in life, how I need to have control and security, and how I am just wired in a way where I have to create safe parameters so that I can control as much of the environment around me to feel safe. Some of us might search for approval in other people. We need the confirmation of others. We need to be justified by others. Your search could be whatever. None of these things are necessarily foolish, and most of them start from something real, a genuine emptiness or a genuine longing for something that means something. When you have thought about your life, have you ever asked the question, what is the purpose of my life? Why did God create me? What is the meaning of all of this? Where have you been searching? See, the problem is not that we search, the problem is where we search and what we expect of things that cannot satisfy. See, King Solomon, he ran this experiment more thoroughly than anybody in history, really. He had resources to chase every desire of his heart. Anything that he wanted, he could have. Pleasure, achievement, wealth, work, wisdom, women, wine. And at the end of all of it, he says in Ecclesiastes 2, verses 10 to 11, I denied myself nothing that my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Is this you, perhaps? The person that denies yourself nothing that you desire and chases after all pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. He doesn't say some of it was disappointing. He says everything was meaningless. Everything that he chased, all those desires, all that pleasure, and all of those things that King Solomon wanted, he chased, he had, he attained, he achieved, and at the end he said, everything is meaningless. A man that had more access to satisfaction than maybe anybody else that has lived, and walks away unsatisfied. See, sometimes you might look at other people and go, if I just had that opportunity, that wealth, that whatever, maybe my life would be better. Maybe there would be more meaning. Maybe. Why is it that King Solomon in his search, we see these people that we can look back on and we see the lessons that they've learned, and yet today, generations and generations and generations later, we are still searching. See, Solomon actually says in Ecclesiastes 3:11, he has made everything beautiful in his time, and he has set eternity on the human heart. He has set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. See, there's something in you, in every single one of us, that is built for more than what this world can give. So as much searching and chasing as you do, the world cannot satisfy that eternal desire that sits within you. There is a void. We do fall short. We do not have it all together. We all have something in us that is wired for something eternal. It is not wired for anything that this world can give. It's not a flaw in our design, but it's a clue about how we're meant to live. about where we're meant to look, where we're meant to search. See, we're chasing something real, but quite often we're filling our lives with something counterfeit. You're not wrong to want to be satisfied, but sometimes we're asking temporary things to do a permanent job within our hearts, and they can't. See, today's word is sustenance. To be sustained, to be satisfied, to be nourished, to be filled. God's sustenance. So when we talk about how big God is, one aspect is the way that he sustains us and he pours life into us. See, I want you to picture two things. First, picture a bucket or a cistern, a container, right? That has holes in it. And when you put water, for example, into it, it continues to leak out. So it continues to need to be filled and filled and filled. It can never hold, right? And then I noticed this picture here under the screen of like a waterfall. So just picture a waterfall or a spring or something like that. Now, when you look at this here, the water is not necessarily being put into something. It is flowing from a source. It doesn't run out. The Bible talks about springs of living water, which we're going to look at today. They come from a source. They don't run out. They continuously flow. The bucket has to be refilled forever. But what flows from the source just keeps flowing. And when we search and we put things in our life that are temporary, it's like that bucket. We have to keep filling and filling and filling. But when you connect to the source of life, which is Jesus, it just is a continuous flow. There is no need for anything else to satisfy. Is this making sense so far? Okay. In Jeremiah 2:13, the prophet Jeremiah put it this way. He said, "My people have committed two sins. One, they have forsaken me, the spring of living water. And two, they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." Some translations say it this way: they have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. You may have heard that. You may have heard living water, that term in church, right? We grow up hearing that. We read it in the Bible, but what does it mean? See, a cistern is something that's built to store water, and it cracks. It's temporary. It's a temporary tool that attempts to hold a life source within it, but a spring, a waterfall, a source, it doesn't store anything. It just keeps giving because it's connected to a source that doesn't run dry. This is what sustenance is. Sustenance is not a single rescue. It's not a single filling, but it's God's ongoing provision. Do you want to be temporarily filled by something that will not satisfy, or do you want God's ongoing provision and sustenance? In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, Moses told Israel in the wilderness that they don't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. We don't live on bread alone, but on what comes from the Lord. Moses is talking about provision tied to a person, not a resource. In Isaiah 55, verse 2, Isaiah pleads with a thirsty nation and says, "Why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Why do you invest your time and your resource into things that don't satisfy?" Have you ever asked yourself that question? There's so many things that life throws our way that we prioritize. If they don't satisfy, why do we give them so much space in our life? In Psalm 55, verse 22, David says simply, "Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken." Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. Not he will rescue you once, but sustain. It's an ongoing tense. When you cast your cares on the Lord, there is an ongoing provision and supply from a person. And perhaps the clearest picture of all of this comes from maybe one of the most famous Psalms, which is Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters, and he refreshes my soul. It's not talking about a single moment of satisfaction or a single meal, but a shepherd who keeps leading, keeps refreshing day after day, keeps providing. So today we're going to look at how God sustains us in 4 movements. Number 1, God's sustenance meets us where we are. God's sustenance, it meets us where we are. Number 2, God's sustenance exposes our search. God's sustenance exposes our search. Number 3, God's sustenance satisfies our thirst. So God's sustenance satisfies our thirst. And number 4, God's sustenance overflows out of us. Number 4 is God's sustenance overflows out of us. Point number 1, God's sustenance meets us where we are. Now, if you've got your Bibles open at John chapter 4, we're going to pick up here. And here is something that is probably worth knowing before we even get into this text. So the conversation that we're about to read, it's the longest single conversation that Jesus has with anyone that's recorded anywhere in Scripture. So we're going to go through the longest conversation he ever had with a person. And it wasn't with the 12 disciples. It wasn't with a large crowd. It wasn't with a person of power or status. It was with a Samaritan woman. And it's worth noticing who she is by comparing what comes right before this. So in John 3, Jesus also has a long conversation with a man called Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee. He's a respected religious teacher, a Jewish man, and he comes to Jesus carefully under the cover of night. And Jesus has a conversation with him, and then we see here, 1 chapter later, a lady that is not named, that has no status, that is not necessarily religious. We don't know much about her beyond this conversation. A Samaritan woman meeting Jesus in broad daylight. See, maybe John didn't place these 2 conversations back to back by accident. Maybe he is showing us something before either conversation finishes, that Jesus comes for everybody. The insider, the outsider. The people with faith, those that have no faith. All cultures, all people. Maybe Jesus came for the respected and the rejected. Maybe he has something for all of us. Those that are seeking answers, and those of us that are just trying to avoid being seen by him at all. See, Nicodemus came to Jesus asking questions. The Samaritan woman, she never left home this day planning to meet him. Let's start John 4 verse 1. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. Let's stop right there. This is very interesting. The Bible says he had to go through Samaria. But geographically and culturally, it's actually not true that he had to go through Samaria. I have a map that I want to bring up on the screen. So you'll have a look here. I'll look at the one behind me. Down the bottom you have Judea. Right at the top you have Galilee. Okay, this is land that Jesus would often go between. And right in the middle you have Samaria. Okay? Now, on the left there's like a red path that goes through the middle. That goes through Samaria. That is the quickest and the fastest way to get between, say, Jerusalem and Galilee. So if you want to go the quickest and the fastest way, sure, you have to go through Samaria. But across here on the right, there's like a dark bluey, blacky kind of path, right? And this path here is actually the path that most people would take when they were traveling between the two regions. Do you know why? They wanted to avoid Samaria. The Jewish people did not want to be around the Samaritan people. So they would go the long way around purely to avoid Samaria. So when it says that Jesus had to go through Samaria, it's actually not true. And it's not really done in the sense of he had to. He had no other option. He could have taken the option that everybody else takes. So why does the Bible say that he had to go through Samaria when that just was not done by the Jewish people? Maybe it's talking about something else. See, Samaritans were viewed by many Jews as being ethnically compromised and theologically suspect. The Jews looked at them as less than. They were a mixed race. And going around Samaria, it wasn't abnormal at all. It was the normal route to avoid them. So when John writes that he had to go through Samaria, there's a Greek word that is used here called "edi," and it's not describing geography. It's not saying he had to go geographically through Samaria. It's saying that there was a necessity for Jesus to go through Samaria. He must go through Samaria. There's a divine purpose for him to go through Samaria. It wasn't a shortcut, but rather an appointment. See, Jesus had to go through Samaria because he was on a mission. There was something divine that he had to do. And when at the start I said, I believe that God has come to meet with you, regardless of what brought you to church today, this is what I'm talking about, divine appointment. When God ordains for you to be somewhere so that you can encounter him and be confronted with truth, so that maybe he can begin to pour his sustaining life into you. Maybe that's what today is for you. Verse 5, he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. So Jacob's well, that's an interesting location. In Genesis 33, there's a plot of land that Jacob bought and settled on when he returned to the land that God had promised him. And in Genesis 48, he passes this land down as an inheritance to his son Joseph. It's holy ground in terms of family history. There's covenant tied to this land. There's promises that God made to the Jewish people generations earlier that are tied into this land. In fact, Joseph's bones were even brought back and buried on this very plot of land where Jacob's well was. So before Jesus says a single word to this woman, he's sitting in a place that has covenant history that is attached to promise, a land that represents God's ancient promise to his people. And it's here on this land that Jesus meets this woman who technically has no claim to that inheritance at all because she is not a pure Jew. And maybe the setting is making a point to us that the promise is meant for all who believe. It's fascinating here too that John notes that Jesus was tired. See, John, the book of John, he's writing to prove that Jesus is the Son of God, so he doesn't shy away from showing us his humanity. He shows us his power. He shows us evidence of him being God, but he also shows us his humanity. Jesus is tired. He's genuinely tired the way that we would get tired after traveling, after a journey. We have read this verse before together, but Hebrews 4:15 tells us that we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize or sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. And I don't know if you remember, we looked at this when we were talking about suffering, but this verse literally means to suffer alongside someone, to feel a shared experience. This is the high priest, Jesus, that we have. And the point stands, Jesus has walked through exhaustion himself, and he sits down beside this well. But apart from those details, where they are, and that Jesus is tired, there's another interesting detail here. It says it was noon, the hour. It was noon, which is the hottest part of the day. See, in those times, women would go to the well to draw water for their families. They would not go at noon. You wouldn't do that because of how hot it would be. You would go in the morning, or you would go in the evening, or you would go at both times. It was safer. It was social. The community did that as a whole. And yet she comes alone to this well at an hour where everybody else is likely not outside. I wonder if that's a coincidence, or maybe if that's avoidance. Maybe she's purposely going there at this time of day to avoid seeing other people. Whatever her history is, and we will look at her history shortly, she arranges her life and her routine around not being seen by others. She doesn't want to be around community. She wants to go when others aren't there, and so she'll go in the heat of the day to draw water, to avoid being seen. She's planning her whole schedule around one goal, staying safe and not noticed. And maybe you do the same. Maybe the way that you live and the way that you portray your life and the way that you do things is to show an image or not show a reality about your life. Maybe you go about things in order to protect yourself or to stay safe or to avoid others. Maybe because of shame or condemnation or whatever it might be. Sometimes the absence of exposure does not mean the presence of peace. See, people may not have seen her struggle, but it didn't mean internally that she was at peace. In fact, we find out the opposite. She was searching. So Jesus sits down at exactly this well at this time when she thought no one would be there to meet her. Verse 7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Her shock in her question to Jesus is not a performance. He is crossing two social barriers here, at least, by speaking to her. One, he's a Jewish rabbi who is not expected to speak publicly to a woman that he doesn't know. And two, the hostility towards the Samaritans ran deep enough that him talking to her would be startling. Here is a man, a Jewish man, a rabbi, who is speaking to me, a woman, a Samaritan. There are cultural implications here. There are lines, there are boundaries that people do not cross. And Jesus sits down here at this time of day to meet her and cross those boundaries. I wonder if he does the same for us. The very isolation that she engineered to avoid being known is where Jesus met her. And this is great news for us, because all of the things that we do to avoid being seen, all of the places that we go to run from God, he meets us where we are. She didn't go looking for him. She went looking for water. And she thought she'd be alone. Sustenance met her searching before she knew she was searching for sustenance. Jesus meets us where we are. Point number 2, God's sustenance exposes our search. Verse 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." If you knew who it is that asks you for a drink. See, she spent this encounter and probably a great deal of her life camouflaging herself, sinking back, managing what is being seen by others and hiding what she doesn't want others to see. And Jesus simply says, if you knew. He reaches out to her, he speaks to her where she's at, and he says, if you knew. He speaks past her issues and reaches out to her. And she takes this literally at first. She says, living water. In everyday Jewish usage, simply meant flowing water, like a stream, like we talked about, living water, something connected to a source, as opposed to still water that might be in a well, for example. So she points out, reasonably, to Jesus that he doesn't have a bucket. This well is deep. And Jesus goes on to clarify what he actually means. So it's interesting. He meets her where she's at. She's there for water, and he uses water to grab her attention. And then he says in verse 13, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. Like what we were talking about, all the things that we try to put in our life. To satisfy our desires, we continue to thirst. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So you remember the verse at the start from Jeremiah. It was talking about springs and cisterns. Jesus is describing the contrast here between them, using the word spring. What he gives does not sit in a container waiting to be drawn out. What he gives does not eventually run dry. It becomes an internal, self-sustaining spring, not something that she carries, but something that will carry her. And again, when we go searching for things to bring satisfaction into our life, we look for things that will carry us, but they won't. We put them inside, we take them on, and they don't satisfy. But Jesus is offering something that never runs out. Jesus is offering the very thing that fills the void that we have in our lives. Verse 15, the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." She asks for the water, still thinking in practical terms that, hey, if I have this water that he is offering, I won't have to come here every day to this well. I won't have to continuously come back. See, the very fact that she's asking for it from him is in itself a confession of her need. See, if she felt whole, she wouldn't be asking a stranger for what he has. So there's something in the way he's approached her that's made her go, yeah, I don't have what I need. Give me what you have. Her request is quiet evidence that whatever she's been living on has not been enough. Are the things that you're living on enough? Do they satisfy you? Jesus' response to her shifts this entire conversation. See, in verse 16, he says, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man that you're with now is not your husband. What you have said is quite true. Pretty confronting for someone that's trying to avoid being seen to have a man sitting in a well suddenly confront her with the things that she has been chasing after. See, we could read this moment as shaming. You could read it without proper context and perceive that maybe Jesus is shaming her here, but I don't think that's what is happening. I don't think he's condemning her. I think he is plainly putting to her the reality of her life, that she is searching for something. She's in a culture where women had very limited power to initiate divorce. So the fact that she's been in 6 relationships could mean things like death of a partner, abandonment, rejection, instability in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's had 5 moral failures. Although we don't know. We don't know. All we know is she's been in 6 relationships with 6 different men. See, what Jesus reveals here isn't a list of sins that he's trying to parade in front of her. He's pointing to the pattern she has in her life. She's gone looking time and time and time again to fill that void, relationship after relationship, something that would make her feel secure, known, whole, and none of it has satisfied her. It's like those cracked cisterns, those cracked buckets, constantly leaking out, never full. Nobody told Jesus this information. He simply knows it, he says it, and the accuracy of what he says gets her attention. It's not condemnation. He's presenting to her a pattern. And maybe he's presenting to you a pattern that you have in your life of chasing and searching and going in the wrong directions. We need to be honest with ourselves about how we live, the things that we chase. We need to be able to sit with our patterns, no matter how painful, and look at them and go, is this it? Is this all there is? See, Jesus, when he comes to her, he doesn't clean her up first. He doesn't expect her to come to him clean. He just starts to talk to her about the life that he gives. He's seeing that she needs something and he's offering it to her in the same breath. And he does the same thing to you today. See, it's the same posture that David had before God in Psalm 139, verses 23 to 24, where he said, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way of the everlasting." As a person who calls yourself a disciple, is this the heart that you have before God? God, seek me, search me, expose to me the things within me that are wrong, and give me your life. David's not asking to be exposed for the sake of exposure. He's asking because he knows that his own heart can deceive him. Your heart can deceive you. He would rather be seen accurately by God than stay comfortably hidden by himself. And that's what's happening with this woman at the well, whether she asked for it or not. This is what it means for sustenance to expose us. It doesn't arrive to embarrass us. It arrives to show us gently what we've been living on, so that we can stop pretending that it's enough. And there's an invitation for you today to stop pretending that the things that you're trying to fill your life with are enough and look to the source of satisfaction. Point number 3, God's sustenance satisfies our thirst. Verse 19. "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." She changed the subject. And it might look like she's trying to deflect from what Jesus is confronting her with, but see, this is actually something that would be disputed between Samaritans and Jewish people in this day and age. Where do we worship? So she recognizes something in him. Maybe he has answers. So we moved on from water, and she throws a theological question to this man. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. And Jesus doesn't dodge this. He doesn't dismiss it. He answers it directly. And in doing so, he relocates her entire question. See, verse 21. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know. For salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. True worship is not about where you worship or necessarily how you worship, but it's the posture of the person that is worshiping. See, again, he's here in Samaria to meet this woman who isn't part of the promised people. And he's telling her, all of that aside, true worship is about your posture, not if you're Jewish, not if you're a Samaritan. Then comes the hinge that this whole passage has been building towards. She says to him in verse 25, I know that the Messiah is coming, called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Isn't this interesting? She's gone to collect water. She's been confronted with the patterns of her life. She's then started to test. And now she's saying, I know that the Messiah is coming. She recognizes something in this man that she has not seen elsewhere. And Jesus answers her plainly, not with parable. He doesn't hide. He says without hesitation in verse 26, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. You know, we see often in Scripture that Jesus avoids sometimes letting people know who he is for whatever reason. And yet right here at this well with this woman who would be considered an outcast, he says, I am the Messiah that you're talking about. He reveals himself to her. In fact, this is the first time in John's gospel that he makes this claim explicitly to a person. Not to the religious leaders in Jerusalem, not to a crowd, not to his own disciples, but to this Samaritan woman with a broken past, alone at a well in the middle of the heat of the day. The fountain of life identifies himself for the first time in this entire gospel to the very person religious culture would have said should not receive. That's what it means for sustenance to satisfy us. Not just an offer of water that doesn't run out, but the source of the water revealing exactly who he is to the ones that need him most, us. He's saying to you today, I am the Messiah. I am the source of living water. I am the one that you need. That is me. He's revealing himself to you. She has moved from recognizing thirst, give me this water, to confronting honestly 5 husbands and a 6th person who's not her husband, confronting her pain, her past, her struggles, to voicing hope. I know that the Messiah is coming, to an encounter with the Messiah himself. She set out to get water that day. He had to go through Samaria to meet her there. It's not a formula to force on every conversation that we have, but it's just something in the way that transformation tends to take place. Honesty and then encounter. Honesty before God about where you sit, the thirst that you have, the desires in your life, and the unsatisfaction you feel, and the encounter with the one who has the source of life to fill those things. Point number 4, God's sustenance overflows out of us. Verse 27. Just then his disciples returned, and they were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and they made their way towards him. There's something in here that we miss sometimes when we read this. See, she came to the well for one reason, to fill a jar with water, but she leaves without the jar. It says that she leaves it there and she returns to the town and says, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" She's found something that the jar was never built to hold. She doesn't need it anymore. What she actually needed, she found in the man standing there waiting for her. The same woman who arranged her entire schedule around avoiding people runs into the town of people she's been avoiding, testifying openly about her very history that she's spent so much time concealing. She doesn't want people to look at her. She doesn't want to feel that shame. And yet now, in this encounter with the Messiah, she runs back into the town. "Come see a man who told me everything about me." See, Sustenance, it didn't fill her privately. It moved her to an outward response to the people around her that she felt shame from, that she was isolating herself from, that she was trying to escape. She doesn't sanitize her testimony in this moment. Her testimony and the fact that she falls short gives more power to the fact that this man has met her where she's at. The thing that she used to hide from people, she now carries forward as evidence. So think about that for a sec. The things that you hide because maybe they're shameful. Maybe you feel self-condemnation. Those things that are your weaknesses, those areas that you struggle, the things that you don't want other people to see. When you realize that the strength and the things that you're searching for are found in God, those things are no longer shameful. They're no longer condemning. They're evidence of the work that God does in your life. The thing that you try to hide from people can become like a weapon that God can use to testify to others. See, some of us are still ashamed of chapters of our life that we think disqualify us from being useful to anyone. But this lady, she wasn't perfect. She didn't have it all together. She had one conversation and God used her. He used her story. Her past didn't disqualify her. Your past doesn't disqualify you. It may be the very thing that gets the attention of the people around you that know you when they see that something's different, something's changed. They have something that I don't have. It becomes the evidence of God's supply, and it's not anything we can find in anything else. Verse 31, his disciples urged him, "Rabbi, eat something." And he said to them, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." Then his disciples said to each other, "Could someone have brought him food?" "My food," said Jesus, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." See, this is worth noting. Jesus explicitly using the word that we've built this message around. He describes obedience to the Father as food, sustenance. My food is to do the will of the Father. See, sustenance is not just her story, it's the pattern in this whole scene. A woman is fed by living water and Jesus is fed by doing the Father's will. And right there in the same breath, Jesus says something that names exactly what's about to happen in this town before it happens. In verse 5, he says, "Don't you have a saying, 'It's still 4 months until harvest'? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields, they are ripe for harvest." He's looking at a town that he hasn't entered yet, a town that minutes ago held nothing but the history of this woman and her isolation. And he's saying that there is a harvest ripe and ready in this town. See, sustenance doesn't just satisfy the one who receives it, but it overflows to the people around them. The source of life that Jesus has for you is not just for you, it's for those around you too. Verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. We have now heard it for ourselves. And we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." Look at the ending to this conversation here. Jesus had to go through Samaria. He was doing the will of God. He had to meet this woman. And as a result of this conversation, we see a town that says, this has to be the Savior of the world. The whole town moves from believing because of what she said to believing because they then encountered him themselves. And that's what sustenance does. It doesn't just fill one person and stop. What God has is for all of us. There's no end to the way that he can sustain us, to the life that he gives. It overflows. It keeps moving towards us from the source, which is him. And it doesn't stop with us. You know, years later in Acts chapter 8, the Apostle Philip, he goes to preach in Samaria. And he walks into a city ripe for the harvest, maybe because of this woman, her testimony, and the impact that this divine encounter with the Messiah had on the whole town. One ordinary, overlooked woman, we don't know her name, going back to the place where she's been hiding and laying the groundwork for future harvest. This is what it means for sustenance to overflow. It doesn't just reach the people in front of you, but it keeps moving. She came to the well carrying an empty jar. At the hour she thought guaranteed that she'd be alone. She left it behind because she wasn't thirsty in the same way anymore, and neither was the town. Here's the question worth sitting with for yourself. What jar have you been carrying back and forth to the same wells over and over and over, hoping that finally this time it will satisfy you? What are those things that you're carrying? Those relationships, those achievements, those goals, those habits? What are the things that you keep refilling because you're never satisfied? What are the things that keep you wondering, is this all there is to life? It isn't. Jesus didn't offer her a better bucket or a bigger bucket. He offered her a spring, something that doesn't need refilling because it was never meant to be stored in the first place. He offers her real life, and that's what he offers you. But are you willing to leave your jar at the well and connect with the spring of life, the fountain of life, Jesus? Your shame, your mistakes, they don't have to be something that you manage. Under grace, they can be something that God uses. Your thirst is not proof that something's wrong with you. It's a doorway to the person that can satisfy it. And your encounter with him is not meant to end with you. It's meant to help others come to the source of life too. It's interesting, as I was preparing this message, my mind went to an encounter that's actually totally unrelated to this story. But it asks a question that I also want to pose to you. See, in Luke 24, Jesus has just been crucified. And some of the women, they come to the tomb with spices to prepare the burial space as per their customs, right? And these angels appear to these ladies at the tomb and they say this question, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" And you, right where you are, sitting in that chair right now, why do you look for the living among the dead? The source of life, the spring of life, the fountain of life, Jesus, he comes. This might be your divine moment. You might have walked into this room today for any which reason, but maybe Jesus walked into the room today to meet you where you're at. We still make the same mistake of searching for meaning in different tombs. We look for our identity in so many different things. We look for peace in so many places. None of those things are necessarily evil. But Jesus rose on the third day. He has the answer. Who knows how many years this lady was going at noon to the same well, relationship after relationship, same routine, never satisfied. If what you're searching for is actually life, real, lasting, unshakable life, you're not going to find it amongst dead things. They cannot sustain you. Only the giver of life, the one who has victory over death, can give you what will fill that void in your life. See, greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. He is the source of everything that you need. He's greater than the suffering that Joseph faced, greater than the smallness that Gideon felt, greater than the storm that we spoke about last month that the disciples thought would kill them. And he's greater than every cistern, every bucket, everything that you've ever built that you thought would satisfy. Only he can give you the satisfaction that comes from the spring of life. He is who you're searching for, whether you realize it or not. That searching that's within you, he is who you are searching for. Are you going to connect with him? Do you see him sitting at the well, offering you the very thing that you have been searching for?